doing?
Oh, just chilling.
So,
Drinking.
noticed, but, aren't you forgetting something?
What?
Why isn't there a VR game before this one? I mean, if you don't want to do it, we can always get Gab to play it.
The sheer physical mechanics and size differences between you and a headset aside, how would that even work? Doesn't he have to turn his head sideways just to look at what's in front of him like some sort of nautical chicken?
I heard that, you fuck!
Yeah, but I think we can figure it out. Trust us.
I mean, I
Let's have another Shark
could,
Week.
but the reality is kind of sad.
What do you mean?
Psychonauts in the Rhombus of Ruin is just a shitty puzzle game. It's about 90 minutes long and is broken up by the world's simplest puzzles that only ever utilize button presses, and the only motion controls implemented are based entirely around turning your head. Sure, it has a couple of jokes and the trademark humor, but it's in very small increments that don't aptly reward the effort put in and goes absolutely nowhere. Even for the most diehard Schaeffer fans, the cost of entry alone is still far too steep, and that's before you've even considered dropping the 20 some odd dollars just to be only marginally entertained for an hour and a half through overly tedious puzzling that makes no use of even half of the options VR brings to the table. Shit's sake, half of that criminally short runtime is dedicated to just jumping between long chains of possessing fish while listening to Raz talk. It's got nothing to offer the player, is entirely recapped in the sequel anyway, and will only offer players who bought it with a couple of visual nods to it, with players who skipped it easily being able to just chalk it up to that trademark humor and miss literally nothing through a lack of context. So why would you want an episode on it, much less one where you have to go through the impossible task of rigging up the ability for you tiny fucks to play it?
Oh, I don't. I just wanted to trick you into addressing it for the video.
That gum you like is gonna come back in style.
Yay!
Fuck me, I can't imagine what it's like to be you. As mentioned in the video on the last title, I skipped Psychonauts for a very long time. One of the many things video game related that I would count myself a fool for aside, I didn't have to wait the length that you did. I mean, when it came to my little passion title, I only had to wait a decade for the sequel, but imagine waiting a goddamn decade and a half for the follow-up to your favorite little title. Something VR game of little consequence, blah blah blah, Kickstarter, and finally Microsoft purchasing the studio and nearly 2 goddamn years of release dates being pushed back. Sure, it didn't spend 8 years in actual development hell, but that last part is definitely more than enough to get me to raise my eyebrows and temper my expectations. So I'm just going to do a little spoiler-free segment right quick and say this. If, for some ungodly reason, a huge fan of the original you are, while simultaneously waiting for my brain-dead opinions on it before deciding to buy you are, which again, for some fucking reason why, stop the video now and go buy it. I have absolutely nothing bad to say going forward, save for 2 minor-ass gripes in which one is so insignificant that the only reason I will bring it up is so that it's a more fair assessment of options available to the player. If you are, for some dumb reason, waiting to hear from me, of all people, before engaging, this is your cue. Just go play it. And for those of you who either don't care and just like the sound of my grating ass voice, 16 goddamn years later, Tim Schaeffer and crew finally bring us Psychonauts 2. Write a story. Any story. But let it have psychics. From the ending of the first title to the happenings of the spooky dodecahedron to the start of 2, only 3 days have passed, which is a nice touch. We pick straight up from having rescued Truman Zanotto, the head of the Psychonauts, to attempting to pry the information from Dr. Lobato's mind, who put him up to doing what he did in the first game, and no, we will in fact not be explaining how he was captured after fleeing in the VR game. Just ignore that it happened, and accept that if you did play it, he really did have nowhere to flee because even that was kind of left field, and just go with the flow. After the failure, we arrive at Psycho HQ and Raz begins his internship. Quickly, he meets a ragtag group of little hipster bastards who will act as his foil and cohorts in equal measure. Right out of the gate, they're annoying shits, with the only quirky one of them reminiscent of the previous title's cast being the one named Boole, and yes, it's fitting.
Where'd you learn how to make pancakes?
Prison.
You may be wondering why the fuck they took this route when the last game had such a memorable cast of children, and it's quite easily explained. You see, the camp was a gathering of outcasts, a sort of governmental cover for getting a chance to round up and evaluate burgeoning psychics. So, of course it would be a cast of weirdos and outcasts in which fish-out-of-water characters such as Raz are still fish out of water even amongst those other fish. So, when you arrive at this prestigious pseudo-governmental facility, it only makes sense that there would be less of that, and a much larger bent on adolescence being kind of hipstery. After all, upper-middle-class families with glow-in-the-dark heads of household tend to produce only 2 kinds of children: filthy goddamn hipsters, and future school shooters. So Raz meets the Cool Kids Club, and they haze him because they're douche nozzles, and he attends his first class as an intern of the Psychonauts. From this point, we begin to learn how the game is going to be thematically different. In the first title, your introduction into the world of psychics is through diving into highly tamed and prestigious minds, teaching you basics, before the plot kicks off and you're drowning in shattered minds, either shattered through paranoid schizophrenia, or narcissists who were the architect of their own destruction all along, etc. Here, however, we're given a completely new exploration of the mind, and while our first mind is one of those structured and tamed ones, Raz gets peer pressured into accidentally implanting a gambling addiction in a sane adult, and then has to go through the layers and fix what he broke to begin with. Having learned that lesson, Raz must then go through the major trials and tribulations of weeding out the players in a major plot to resurrect a horrible genocidal maniac, as well as piecing together the fractured psyches of those who aren't damaged mentally, but instead shut themselves off as a response to the trauma of watching their friend and loved one become said genocidal maniac. In short, the original founders of the Psychonauts fought that person, and the heartbreak of losing friends, in one case being physically trapped and isolated, and a couple going into hermitage, creates these layers of insecurity and paranoia that Raz has to plunder and help bring them out of. Sorrow, loss, and multiple forms of rejection play larger roles this time around. Raz spends less time jumping between demented heads just to get from point A to point B, and spends more time using them as direct forms of transit not just to each other, but to solving the mystery. Whereas the previous title gave us fantastical and fun looks into people who were incapable of ever being normal again, Psychonauts 2 has Raz playing therapist to help bring the old team back together again while uncovering the mystery of Maligula, the aforementioned maniac. Throughout the story, multiple plot points are brought up, most of them being red herrings that are dropped just as quickly, but it's not a mystery game despite giving you plenty of clues to gather what might be going on just before you're told the answers. It's slightly annoying and kind of time-wasty, but serves more to draw certain characters away from the plot to allow the game, and thus the player, to focus more on the action at hand and the real investigation. Its themes are a little more, adulty, more mature, but not in a way that would really raise the game's rating, more to explore consequences of one's actions and how events affect people. Raz isn't at a quirky summer camp anymore. He's in with the big leagues, dealing with shit that's on a level he's not ready for, but is stuck dealing with regardless. It's played out incredibly well with the aforementioned red herrings and twists never being so outlandish that they would insult the player's intelligence, and they give you a strong through line of events with that trademark charm and humor. Sure, you're not going to get something so crazy in left field as Mr. Pokeloke, but when you're going through a mental theme park of tyrannical monarchic propaganda, you get pretty much the same reactions of humor and lighthearted existential horror. This is unfortunately where the video is going to slow down and start to drag a bit, because gameplay it's Psychonauts. Quite literally everything is translated almost one-to-one, with all the jank of the 6th gen and the PC port being ironed out. New enemies are introduced with their own weaknesses, tactics, and even ways their attacks can be used to your advantage, with a small smattering of new powers for dealing with them, as well as how they function in levels. It's sad to say it, but there is almost nothing that can be said about the gameplay that hasn't been said a billion times about the first game. Combat has been refined and the jank is gone, but no true levels of depth have been added, just the new powers and new options through upgrading powers. It's all there, and as it's a sequel, it's all refined, expanded, and mastered for the new title. Even the world map is tightened up with the scavenger hunt making a return, while removing the massive areas that served no other purpose than bloating the collectathons. It's all wrapped up and honed to a strong as fuck experience that expands on everything that already existed, while trimming out the fat. New powers include the ability to slow time for targeted objects and enemies, the ability to make mental connections between thoughts for travel and pulling enemies closer, as well as the ability to manifest an archetype of your personality, which will be an especially sweet treat for fans of Invader Zim.
Better investing will be back in tip. Another day, another dollar. Woo, I'm an airplane.
Sadly, no Angry Beavers reference that I could suss out. Another great part is that, yes, the game has a pwner, but after you've completed the game, you're thrown back into the HQ to finish out all the shit you couldn't be bothered to as you went, or otherwise simply couldn't because of said pwner. It's really all just there and improved. Even the soundtrack remains fantastic. It's slightly less cartoony, I will say, than the last game though. There's nothing as childishly demented as the track from the stage play, but it's still thematic to each individual setting. Jack Black is here too. Why? Because Tim Schaeffer, that's why. Look, I'm not a huge fan of Jack Black, but he's not prominent, he's not doing his shitty comedy routine, and it plays to a period and theme that harmonize well, and his acting is restrained and purposeful. Frankly, I would have liked to see a lot more of that quirky madness, but that's not the environment Raz is in this time, so it simply wouldn't fit. What is left out of the soundtrack due to the changes in themes is made up for by the level design anyway. Finally, this game is fucking gorgeous. Not just texture detail depth, but their use of color palettes and art design make these fantastical, almost Muppet-like designs feel grand and real. Animation and cinematography are also top goddamn notch. Very few games put the effort into crafting what this game aims for. It's really fucking hard to explain without showing it, and even then, I need to upgrade my recording drive as the lower bit rates of my recordings do absolutely zero justice to the graphics and camera work. The game on PC has a couple of tiny performance issues, but it comes in the form of high CPU usage and incredibly minor hiccups from time to time, mostly centered around going from in-engine cutscenes to gameplay like the world's slightest chug in the transition between the two. It's fucking nuts! It really is! 16 goddamn years between titles, and yet they came out with a title far stronger than some other storied devs with much shorter spans between the releases ever did. I mean, could you fucking imagine having 10 years between releases and just absolutely fucking up everything that made the original game great? Seriously, who does that shit?
Hey, boys! Did somebody say they want a little madness in their life?
God damn it, Mabel, Oh. It's you. Fuck do you want?
I was just in the neighborhood and decided to pop in. It's been so long since we played together, and I miss you. Hey, you know, just hanging out. 2 days I was popping in and said, you know, I thought it'd be a long time for playing. Oh, no, please, don't take me out. No, it's so cold and dark in there, please, no. No, don't take me. No, don't make me go back. Don't make me go back. I don't want to go in there. It's so cold. No. No, no, please. I just want to be loved.
The game only has 2 goddamn issues. The first and practically insignificant one is the lack of a hard save feature. You're entirely reliant on auto-saves. I sometimes like to come out of a cutscene, grab a couple collectibles, save, and walk away, but you can't. The game tells you when your last autosave was before quitting, and it's simple and quick to hit something that will force the game to autosave, so really, it's not a true problem. The second, however, is an actual problem. No physical release. Get fucked. 16 years later, and Tim Schaeffer and crew showed the world that not only do they still got it, but those old school platformers can still be made the way they used to be, can still hold their own, can still appeal to modern audiences, and most importantly, that Double Fine can still make them, and make them beautiful. The only true indication that it's been a decade and a half between titles is the graphical fidelity and what they can do with the cinematography. Look, I would love to say more about the game, but without spoiling every single detail and just repeating myself or other people on the mechanics, there's not much I can say. It really is a perfect sequel. More, better, expanded, tightened up. If you loved the original, you'll love this. If you haven't played the original, don't be like me. Don't spend a decade putting it off. Go do it. Then play this one. I promise you won't regret it, and I promise you'll absolutely love it. Skip Rhombus of Ruin, though. Not worth the cost of admission on any level. I'm the Necroswanson, and you can go fuck yourselves.
Oh, mergy touch and dodgy touch and little old lambsy divey, a kiddly divey too, wouldn't it? You? Why aren't the credits rolling? Oh, I know what you want. You were so patient, and Jackass left you hanging, didn't he? Well, don't say I never done nothing for you.